Peace, everyone. This is your boy, Brother Jay, and my brother Dwayne coming to you with the first episode of Restoring the African Mind. And in our very first episode, we want to talk about WWE superstar Sol Ruca and the identity, the black identity that goes on in the WWE. So Sol Ruca is a rising WWE superstar. Um, she is originally from California. Her background, she graduated from Oregon with a collegiate career in gymnastics. She's very super athletic. In my opinion, she's probably the most athletic female on the roster. She joined WWE back in 2022, and she became a double champion in NXT, holding the North American title and the Speed title. And as I was telling Dwayne, and I actually met her in Las Vegas last year, and I was able to grab a picture of her with the title. So she joined the main roster of WWE this year, and WWE immediately put her into a high-profile feud with the man Becky Lynch, who is one of the Four Horsewomen, very popular athlete in that division. Um, So Ruka actually defeated Becky Lynch in the WWE's pay-per-view called Clash in Italy on May 31st. And those who are conscious of Sol Ruca and her background hailed her as the first black woman to hold the Intercontinental Women's title in WWE. That caused a lot of discussion amongst fans questioning her racial identity because she definitely passes as being a white woman. And so, why do we say this? Because according to America's one drop rule, Sol fits the description of being a black woman, even though she passes as white. To further expand that, Sol's mother is an American white woman, and her father is a black man who is also biracial, one half black, one half white, which makes Sol Ruca 1/4 black. And a lot of discussion was going on between the fans. Sol was being criticized. So she did a recent interview with Stephanie McMahon a couple of months ago. And toward the end of the interview, Stephanie McMahon never mentioned anything about the controversy. And so kudos to Sol Ruca when Stephanie McMahon asked her, "Hey, is there anything else? Did we miss anything? Is there anything else you want to bring up about your life?" Sol actually prompted the conversation of, "Hey, I just want everybody to know that I'm biracial, and there's a lot of controversy surrounding me being a quote unquote black woman." And so we can easily tell right there that at least with Sol and her upbringing, her father definitely, as we see, as me and Dwayne see with how it comes with biracial, like normally you select one side or you pick one side over the other. It was refreshing to see that Sol makes a point to acknowledge her black racial identity. So with that, we're going to turn it over to our dear brother Dwayne.
Yeah, thank you. So a lot of the debate and discourse around her identity really is a debate around the one drop rule and whether or not we should still be applying the one drop rule. So for those who aren't familiar, the one drop rule basically says if you have one drop of black blood, you're black. It doesn't matter how minuscule the drop is. You could be one half, 1/4, 1/8. You're still black. And the infamous Plessy v. Ferguson case, that was the Supreme Court case that actually upheld racial segregation. That was the case that actually involved somebody who was 1/8. So that even though he was only 1/8 black, the ruling held that racial segregation still applied to him. And the reason for the one drop rule was to uphold a very strict color line so that anybody, regardless of how mixed you were, was still regarded as black and was treated as such. Now, what we have to understand about the one drop rule and about racial identity in general is that racial identity is biological and social. The biological aspect of race is, I think, the aspect of race that most people think about. That's outward appearance, the phenotypical appearance, skin complexion, hair texture, those sort of things. But there's also a social aspect to race as well, because as we know, race largely is a social construct. Race is not something that really exists on a scientific level beyond what we could physically observe. But race becomes social when we attach a particular identity to these outward physical features and also cultural features as well. Another aspect of race isn't so much how you look, but it's also the cultural background that you come from as well. And the social aspect of race is important to understand because historically, due to the one drop rule, there were certain individuals who, even though they phenotypically did not look black because of how mixed they were, socially actually identified as black. A very prominent example of this that I always use is Robert Campbell. Very underrated figure in the history of Pan-Africanism, but I would argue is one of the founding figures in terms of the development of Pan-Africanism. He was a brother from Jamaica who joined Martin Delaney in a journey throughout West Africa to create an establishment in West Africa for African Americans. Now, Robert Campbell was actually one-fourth black. He mentions this in his account of traveling in West Africa. And he says when he was traveling across Africa, the Africans there, they thought he was a white man. They didn't even know that he was a brother like them, but even though he could pass for being white, he firmly identified as being a black man and not only identified but also involved himself in that struggle. Another example that comes to mind is Adam Clayton Powell, obviously very prominent political leader in the history of the Black American struggle. He was somebody who actually earlier in his life did pass for white. So we see in our history certain individuals who, even though they could pass for white, they chose to identify as Black socially and connected themselves to the Black liberation struggle. Now, what's also important to understand about the one drop rule is that it's unique to America and the way America structured its racial categories. It is different in other parts of the world. So, for example, in South Africa, the white people in South Africa very deliberately used a different category when it comes to classifying race. In South Africa, people who are biracial or mixed race are colored. And the reason for that is in America, Black people are a minority group and white people have historically been the majority. So you didn't really need biracial people or mixed race people to be part of the dominant oppressing group because you were already in the majority. So the one drop rule was actually to keep mixed race people out of filtering into the dominant white ruling class. In South Africa, because white people were the minority group and they were the ones in charge, they were a minority dominating over a majority. They didn't want the mixed race population aligning with the Black people in the struggle for liberation. So creating colored as a separate category rather than doing a one drop rule in South Africa was a very deliberate divide and rule tactic. Brazil, it's even worse. Brazil deliberately tried to whiten. That was the official policy to whiten the Black population in Brazil. So similarly, Brazil never actually had officially a one-drop rule in the way that America did for purposes of segregation. Brazil did the opposite. In Brazil, people who were mixed race, people who were white passing, were actually encouraged to identify as being white as a part of the process of whitening the Black population to eliminate Black people culturally and biologically. So that if you continue mixing the population to the point where you have a white passing or mixed population that doesn't identify as Black, there's no more Black people, and that's how Brazil decided to solve the race problem. So one of the topics that I've written about in the writings that I've done on the racial situation in Brazil, it's that there is an activist from Brazil named Anna Roland who actually advocated that Black people in Brazil should adopt their version of a one drop rule. And the reason why she's advocating for this is what she realized is just like in South Africa, because there was no one drop rule, that became a way of dividing the Black population. And she said it was very difficult to organize Black people in Brazil because there's a question of, well, who actually is Black? If you ever get to see a picture of Edna Rollins, she's very fair-skinned sister, by her own admission, she said in some parts of Brazil she could even pass for white if she wanted to. So what she realized is that if you have a population in Brazil of people who are phenotypically Black, unquestionably Black phenotypically, and on the other end of the spectrum, you have people like her, brothers and sisters like her, who could pass for white, and everybody in between that spectrum. And if you read Black in Latin America by Henry Louis Gates, he points out that in Brazil, there was over 100 different categories based on people's complexions and features and that sort of thing. So, in America, race for the most part is pretty straightforward. Either you're Black or you're white. Obviously, historically, we've had terms like mulatto, octoroon, quadroon, those sort of things. But could you imagine 100 different categories for Black people? That's how confusing the situation in Brazil was. So that's why Edna Rollin was saying maybe Black people in Brazil need to actually adopt their version of a one-drop rule and make it easier for the Black people in Brazil to organize, because just like in South Africa, Black people in Brazil are actually the majority. When you who pulled together all of the Black people and the mixed race people with African ancestry, they're actually the majority. So the categorization of race in Brazil works against the Black population by dividing that majority. So I mentioned that as a historical background, but also I think it's important to understand that, very often people in America assume that the American classifications of race and the American way of viewing race is international or global. And I think it's important to understand that white supremacists in America deliberately crafted certain racial classifications to suit their purposes and to advance their domination in America. Same thing in South Africa, same thing in Brazil. So wherever European colonizers went, and again, this is why I said race is partly a social category, because wherever the Europeans went, they reclassified race based on whatever served their interest. And what served the interest of the white majority in America is to create a one-drop rule to ensure that mixed race people can be white. They can't join the dominant white population, but they can be part of the oppressed Black population as well. So I think that's an important historical background to understand. And I mention it because whenever these conversations about the one drop rule come up within the Black community, I think a lot of people don't really understand the historical reasons for why there is a one drop rule and the ramifications of what happens in societies where white people have done the opposite. Instead of implementing a one drop rule, actually implemented a policy to keep our people divided.
I love it, Dwayne. And you mentioned um, Brazil. Do you want to also maybe briefly talk about Argentina, who practiced
Oh,
something similar?
Argentina was even worse, but you're right. It's not just Brazil. So after slavery ended in the United States, the white supremacists here had the mentality of segregation. They wanted to maintain strict racial segregation between the white population and the Black population, which, really think about the psychology of that. We're going to drag your people all the way from Africa to work them as slaves, and when we don't need the slave labor anymore, you can stay here, but you can't live around us. You got to live in your segregated spaces. We don't want to see you. We don't want to be around you. Now, white people in Latin America had a different type of philosophy. Just like white people in America, just like the racists here, they didn't want Black people around. But they knew if we keep these people segregated as a distinct population away from us, they're still going to be here. So what white people in Latin America decided to do is, if we encourage mixing, if we encourage whitening the population over several generations, these Black people just disappear. We won't have Black people anymore. So, and it's interesting to think about this as well, because again, in the American context, we're so accustomed to associating white supremacists with being opposed to interracial marriages, when in Latin America, the white supremacists had the opposite mentality. They they didn't impose strict racial segregation laws. They didn't impose laws barring interracial relationships. They actually encouraged it because they wanted an elimination of the Black population. So again, going back to the point that Edna Rollin was making, it's that why she's advocating for one drop rule in Brazil is to reverse the whitening process, because there's an interview of hers where she said you could make the argument that Brazil had whitened the Black population, but on the flip side, you could also argue that that policy caused the white population in Brazil to be blackened. So she was trying to reverse the situation on its head by getting the mixed population to identify with the Black struggle. Because the thing about white passing individuals, and this is also related to, I think, one of the limitations of how we think about the one drop rule for those of us who still adhere to the one drop rule in America, it's that there's a tendency to assume that because we still have a one drop rule, or the perception of a one drop rule in America, that anybody who's biracial or mixed will identify as Black and identify with the Black struggle. And part of the debate over Sol Ruca, it's, I did see people saying, well, if she's white passing, how much can she actually identify with the Black community and with the Black struggle? And there's a very, I think, somewhat well-known example that I've actually written about in one of my books, about a woman named Elizabeth Key uh, Grinstead. And Grinstead was a biracial woman who was able to sue and win her freedom and married a white man. And several generations later, her white descendants became slave owners. And the reason why I mentioned that, it's, to me, that's the danger of the one drop rule. that people who are not only white passing, but can actually participate in the system of white supremacy, become white supremacists, become slave owners, does it make any sense to classify those individuals as being black simply because they've got that one drop? So I think that's where we need to be careful with the one drop rule. And it goes back to what you're saying about Argentina and what we see across Latin America is that we do have to understand that part of the the system of white supremacy, it's that there's a very deliberate effort to raise Black people not just in terms of the physical violence against us, but to erase the very identity of Black people, to raise the very social classification of what it is to be Black. And part of that is, as I pointed out in Latin America, was not only whitening the population in terms of, as I said, the biological aspect of race, raising the phenotypical features of the Black population, but the whitening is also erasing the identity, the very identity of being Black, so that when you phenotypically become white passing, you also become white in terms of politically, socially, and as a result of that, you also become part of the dominant system of oppression. So, as I said, we need to be careful about how we apply the one drop rule. And I think I understand why some people do it because, as I pointed out, it does create a sense of racial solidarity among Black people in America that, well, you're one of us. It's not like a South African situation where the colored tend to not, think of themselves as being Black by and large. But as I pointed out, the danger in that is I think a lot of people start claiming people who themselves aren't claiming to be part of the community. And it becomes especially counterproductive when you start claiming people who are actually white supremacists. And that's why I used the example of Elizabeth Key, because her descendants under the one drop rule were Black people, but they were also white slave owners.
So Dwayne, so what is give us your take on Sol Ruca, because she mentioned in the interview with Stephanie McMahon that it's a very tough thing for her to navigate. She's very young. I think she is in her very early 20s. I do like the fact that she is acknowledging it, and I like the way she responded to it. But what advice would you give her on how to navigate through something that's very difficult? Because clearly, if Sol Ruca never told us anything, she looks straight up like a white woman.
Yeah, yeah.
So what advice would you give her to navigate through
And
this?
that's what was interesting to me because you sent me the clip, and I noticed that she very easily could say, I'm white because that's how she looks. Or she could even easily say she's mixed and just leave it at that. But I do get a sense that, at least from what I picked up in the interview, that on some level she actually does identify as being Black because her dad is biracial. So it seems like she actually is not only acknowledging the Black ancestry, but also feels some sort of connection to being Black and is trying to navigate the connection she obviously feels to her dad, but also navigate the fact that she doesn't look Black at all. Going back to what I was saying about race, that I think she's dealing with the struggle of phenotypically not being Black, but socially feeling like you should be Black or you should identify with being Black. And I would imagine it's a difficult place to be in where you don't look like the thing that you feel like you should identify with, and you don't look like the thing that a lot of people actually are identifying you as such. Because, as I pointed out, a lot of the discussion stems from the fact that people have been claiming her as being Black. As you pointed out, people were claiming her as being Black. But then on the other end of it, there's people saying, well, hold up, that's a white woman. Why are we claiming this white woman as being Black? And I think she's caught in between that, as I pointed out, caught in between looking one way phenotypically, but identifying another way socially. And that's why I started by giving the historical background, the historical context. And I very deliberately mentioned figures like Robert Campbell, deliberately mentioned figures like Adam Clayton Powell, George Jackson, for those of you who are familiar with some of his books in African history. John Henry Clark mentioned that George Jackson was a very light-skinned brother who, if he really wanted to, could have tried to pass for white and got through life passing for white. And John Henry Clark said a lot of times when George Jackson would be out in the Black community, he would actually be harassed by Black men who thought that he was a white man in the Black community. They didn't even know that this man was a renowned historian of Black history. So I deliberately mentioned some of those names to show that even though these individuals phenotypically looked white or could have passed for white, they identified with Black people, identified with Black history, identified with the Black struggle. So for individuals who are really struggling with that sense of identity, I think that those are good examples of what that looks like. Because part of why people who are white passing, who even might identify as being Black, are looked at with suspicion in the Black community is because, well, if you didn't tell people your dad was black, no one would have known you're black. So in a way, you do get to benefit from white privilege because you're not facing the same daily discrimination that we're facing. So why I mention those names is that what that looks like in terms of people who are typically white but identify as being black, it's that you actually have to get that trust in the community, you have to be involved in the same struggle that we're involved in. Put yourself in that same struggle, put yourself on the line in the way that those ancestors that I mentioned did. These were people who firmly identified with Black people and firmly identified with the Black struggle. And it goes back to your point that part of why people who are white passing are distrusted is that feeling of you get to pick and choose when you want to be Black. So you get to be Black when it comes to claiming the culture and the parts of being Black that everybody loves to claim, but you get to not be black when it comes to the discrimination and the struggles and the other parts of what black people deal with. So I think it's important that people who are white passing who really want to firmly identify with the black community actually have to participate in and identify with the struggle that goes to being black as well.
I love it, Dwayne.
Don't do like this is something that does bother me about Meghan Markle. I feel like she's an example of somebody that picks and chooses when she's black and when she's biracial.
100%. Yes, Meghan Markle, definitely, definitely. And to go back to Soul, clearly the way we know where her athleticism came from. We know where that came. She's a superior, supreme athlete. Like if you're interested, like in watching WWE and watching the matches, man, she does things. She's a special talent, and I do like the fact that she prompted the conversation. And to Dwayne's point, so if you want to be identified, just we don't know what your politics are, we don't know your social and political stances, but just keep doing what you're doing, keep navigating through it. There's my brother Dwayne out here. There's enough people out here that can help you with that. If because I know I know she's online a lot, so she runs across this video, man. I think it'll be it'll be very beneficial to her. So then, as we transition out of what Soul's been experiencing as passing as white, but you know, in some instances we see her identifying as black. Let's talk about the overall history of the WWE and its struggle with the racial problem in America, right? Because as we know in sports, whatever's happening in society plays out into sports, plays out into entertainment. So let's talk about the history of WWE's problem dealing with black athletes.
Yeah, and an interesting thing about you mentioning sports is that unlike professional wrestling, sports isn't scripted, so you can't deny that black people are dominant in that field. Now, the problem with pro wrestling is that because it's scripted, it's very easy to deny black people certain positions that they probably deserve, and that's been not just an issue with WWE and back when it was WWF, but that's been an issue across pro wrestling in general. That there've been a lot of really talented black wrestlers who've really never gotten the push that they should have gotten, have never gotten the positions in the companies that they should have received because of racism in these companies, and particularly WWE, WWF under Vince McMahon was extremely terrible. We've had several conversations about the different racial stereotypes that they've put forward. I mean, think about since Vince McMahon took over the company, some of the characters they put forward, we had voodoo witch doctors, we had pimps, had rappers, crime time. They were a tag team that were a group of criminals. They'd go around the arena just stealing things from people. So those are the type of stereotypes that were put out there. It was always, or even the sexual deviant. They've had quite a few wrestlers like Mark Henry, Viscera doing the sexual deviant, which we know the history behind that of America perceiving black men as being sexually uncontrollable and the justifications of lynchings that came through that. So just about every negative stereotype of black people you could think of, um, African savages as well, Ugandan savages. So every negative stereotype you could think about with black people, WWE has portrayed that at some point. And the other part that we speak about is that The Rock, Dwayne Johnson, he is the most prominent black wrestler in the history of the company, and they hardly ever acknowledge that he's black. They promote more of his Samoan side than his actual black ancestry. And the part that was really funny to me when I realized this from the conversations we had, that his career really took off in the Nation of Domination, and they never mention it. When you think about what he means to the company, the Nation of Domination should be one of the most important stables in history of WWE, and they rarely ever acknowledge it. So it definitely indicates what the company historically has thought about Black people. And I'll close my point by talking about we definitely see this with the feud with Booker T and Triple H during WrestleMania, where not only do I think Booker T should have won that just because how over he was at the time with the fans, but if you were going to do a feud where Triple H wins, why would you deliberately introduce racism as an element of the feud and then have the racist heel go over? What message are you sending to wrestling fans when you're deliberately having the racist go over? And my view on it is I feel like at that point, Triple H should have had enough clout in the company that if he didn't want to go through with a storyline like that, he didn't have to, but obviously he did. So, since then, I've looked at him differently because, obviously pro wrestling, wrestlers don't have complete control over the storylines, but I feel like at that point in his career, he had enough influence in the company that if he didn't want to do a storyline like that, if he didn't want to refer to the Booker T in the type of language that he did, he wouldn't have done it. So I think I mentioned that because obviously he's the guy running the company now. So we see the shift from Vince McMahon, who was very obviously telling Black people how he felt about us with the type of characters he's putting forward, to Triple H running the company, and Triple H was not only involved in that storyline, but he was also involved in the very infamous blackface situation involving the same Nation of Domination. So what we see with WWE, it's that not only is it a company that's been putting out these very stereotypical images of Black people, but it's a company run by individuals who have a very shady past when it comes to where they stand on racism.
Dwayne, you bring up an excellent point, and now I want to rewind back to what you said about The Rock. To your point, people, we talked about how WWE they create revisionist history, right? They never tell the full story of a lot of these wrestler stories, and if you let WWE tell it, The Rock just dropped out of the sky, became The Rock. It's like, no, he was Flex Kavana, I think that was his first name, and he was a horrible character that did get over. Then he became Rocky Maivia. He was getting a little bit of traction, but he still wasn't over. He wasn't over until he joined the Nation of Domination. And to your point, they only had one known. I've only known of one known segment where The Rock interacted with his black father. I think his father came in to save him. I think he may have been Intercontinental Champion, but his father came in and saved him from getting beat up by some guys. But to your point, only thing we ever see is The Rock's Samoan mother who's sitting ringside, and he always runs over there to kiss her. And so it's like you would think he was Samoan.
And you remember the storyline with Rikishi. Rikishi ran over Stone Cold because the Island Boys need to stick together. So Rikishi he was saying he's doing it because Rock is Samoan like him. So after The Rock became champion, became one of the faces of the company, they completely forgot everything about him being black, even though they put him in a group that very deliberately was a militant black group. It was obviously a parody of the Nation of Islam. So you didn't just put him in the black group, you put him in the blackest group that you could possibly put him in, and now they want the fans to forget that he was ever black.
And the way to your point, now let's rewind too. For those young WWE fans that don't know, but since WWE doesn't want to play those clips, The Rock has a full-blooded black father who actually wrestled in the WWE. I think the way, correct me, he wrestled with Tony Atlas. I think they were the first two black tag team champions.
Yeah, tag teams, yeah.
And WWE completely just erased him out of everybody's memory. How?
It's not even just him. I mean, it also goes back to what I was saying before, but that group had some really talented individuals that I think never got the push they deserve. Like D'Lo Brown. D'Lo Brown should have been a superstar in his time. Ron Simmons, Farouk. I really hate how he's been reduced to catchphrase. In WCW, he was the first black champion in WCW. So I mean, that group had some really talented individuals. I think never really got the push that they should have because WWE's they've really struggled with trying to figure out what to do with their black talent because they've always given the black talents not only just these stereotypical gimmicks, but things that don't even make sense. Like having Kofi Kingston trying to be a Jamaican, even though he very clearly is not Jamaican, can't do the accent. And they named him Kingston because otherwise you wouldn't have known he was Jamaican if he didn't have the name of Jamaica's capital. So very obvious. Um, or Art Truth, do you remember when he was K Quick? And
Yep.
they had him being a rapper, but he couldn't rap.
He
So
could not rap.
they give black people these gimmicks that don't even fit the individuals, but they're always trying to put us in these very stereotypical slots. And I think that's really hindered a lot of their black talent because instead of just allowing black talent to develop naturally, they try to put them in these stereotypical roles. And yeah, it's been a problem throughout the history of the company. And you can make the argument that the company still struggles with what to do with black talent and how to effectively push black talent.
Absolutely. And before we go into current state of black wrestlers, I do want to add to Dwayne's point earlier about Triple H and Booker T. If you follow WWE content, there's a lot of black fans who call Triple H Triple K, right? Because they know his history. What Dwayne was alluding to earlier, the most racist promo that probably one of the most racist promos that was ever cut in WWE.
Which says a lot. That's only one of them. It's not even
Yeah, yeah. I had to walk that back. Dwayne. I had to. I had to walk that.
And not even just we're talking black people. It's not even just black people. They've done racial
Absolutely.
stereotypes to everybody.
Absolutely. What he did with the Hispanic community, the Arab community, all the racism. But in that promo of everybody, we rewind back to that day what he had with Booker T. Like Dwayne said, not only did Triple H get over with being with a racist promo, he won the match. And Booker T, if you know his history, he was incredibly popular, a top athlete, a top guy in WCW before he came over. And Triple H was basically saying, only thing people like you, Booker T, are good for is to dance. And let's play that back into the real world. That's all that white people want black people to do. Remember when LeBron was trying to speak out on a social issue, and then this white conservative commentator was like, "LeBron, shut up and dribble." They just want black people to shut up and dribble. They just want us to shut up and dance. So, and to Dwayne's point, Triple H at that point had a lot of pull in the organization. I mean, I think by that time he may have been married to Stephanie McMahon, or
I don't think they were married at the time, but they were dating.
They were dating. They were dating at the time. So he had some pull. Like these guys can literally go in there and be like, "Hey, Vince, I kind of want to say this instead of that."
Not be a racist.
Yeah. But Triple H said, "Nah, this is right up my alley. I'm for the say."
And he didn't even look uncomfortable doing it.
He did not look. I was telling the way that we talked about Stone Cold Steve Austin too, and I was like, I felt so uncomfortable with Stone Cold in the movie The Longest Yard because he was a prison guard and Nelly, the rapper Nelly, was playing this football or a prominent football, I think high school player, and they was forming this kind of football game against each other. And Stone Cold mentioned the N word 3 or 4 times in that movie, and it just rolled off his. You could tell, like with Leonardo DiCaprio said he was uncomfortable saying the N word in Django, and you can see that with Stone Cold, that just rolled off his tongue. So like with Triple H, it was a promo. It's like he's been waiting to cut his entire life. So we gotta understand who we dealing with. We gotta understand who we're dealing with in WWE, and it's very conflicted. Like me and Dwayne say, like we always talk about this. Like for black, not only for the black wrestlers who experiencing it, also for the black fans. Like WWE has a large black fan base, so it leaves us conflicted too. Like, how can I keep supporting this when you're doing this to the people that look like me? So the way I'll let you kind of put a bow on that.
Yeah, but I also want to follow up with Booker T because he'd be another example of anybody who's never watched him in WCW he was presented completely differently in WCW, particularly Harlem Heat, than how he became in WWE. And I think, to his credit, he definitely pulled it off. He definitely was very hilarious in the position they put him in, but they made him more of a comedic type of character in WWE, more comedic than he was in WCW. And again, I think it goes back to always putting black people in these very deliberate, stereotypical roles where because the perception is that we're just entertainers. You don't have to take us seriously. That Booker T goes to WWE and he's not taken seriously, becomes more of a comedy character than he was in WCW. And like I said, to his credit, he definitely got over being more of a comedic role. But when you think about the type of superstars that WWE's historically pushed, Hulk Hogan wasn't a comedy act. Stone Cold wasn't a comedy act. The Rock was funny, but because of the stuff that he was saying on the mic, but he wasn't pushed as a comedic type of figure. Triple H, Undertaker, all the top guys, they were never pushed as being comedic type of individuals. I think Kurt Angle probably is the one exception. I could think if he started off being a more
Mhm.
comedic heel, but for the most part, the top stars have always been more serious. And that's how Booker T was in WCW. He wasn't presented as a comedic character until he came to WWE, and suddenly he's a comedic character. I think he definitely should have been in the main event scene more than he was for a lot of stretches of his run in WWE. He was more of a mid card type of wrestler as well. So I mention it because I think I don't know about you, but I was one of the rare, I think the rare percentage of the population that were both WCW and WWF fans during the Monday Night Wars. But I think people who weren't really watching WCW, I think it's very easy to overlook who Booker T was when he was in WCW and the type of star that he was, and how much of that was watered down when he came to the WWE. And I mean, the King Booker stuff was hilarious, but that obviously was not who Booker T was when he was
Not
in
at all.
WCW. And something that crossed my mind about earlier in the discussion. I think I might have mistakenly said George Jackson, but it's actually John G. Jackson was the
John
individual
G.
that I was referring
Mhm.
to. I think I might have said George. It crossed my mind, but John Jackson, historian, is who I was referring to. But yeah, but Booker T would be a great example of the point, and I think obviously there's a history of WCW guys going to WWE, WWF, and being watered down. So that's part of it. But as somebody who's a fan of who Booker T was, WCW, WWE Booker T just he never hit the same way.
Never hit the same way. And now we're going to transition to. We gave you the history. Now we want to transition to today's state of black wrestlers, particularly in the WWE. Um, there was a lot of angst amongst fans with Carmelo Hayes, who he came out of NXT, a great young talent. He went to SmackDown as the number one. I think he was the number one pick when they was doing the draft. And and Dwayne, the first thing they did with Carmelo Hayes, they put him in a match with Cody Rhodes. And we both know Cody Rhodes is not about to lose to a call up. So for ever since that booking, like Carmelo Hayes has just been. He eventually won the United States Championship, but then he was having a good reign. He had like seven, I think maybe 6 or 7 open challenge title defenses, looked very well. And then what did they do? They took the belt off of him and gave it to Sami Zayn, who doesn't need the belt. And then they took him completely off of the WWE WrestleMania card. Another example of black talent is the recent release of Kofi Kingston and Xavier Woods as the New Day. I mean, this is a staple, one of the greatest tag team tandems in history. And WWE just.
And that's another example of what I was talking about. That New Day became a comedy routine, and those brothers were actually seriously talented. So I feel like they could have done more with them as a more serious group, but they put them in a comedy role and they got over with the comedy role. So, like I was saying, just similar to Booker T, that they were able to make that work. So yeah, just it's unfortunate what happened with them because I feel like they could have had more productive careers if WWE had seen them as being more serious competitors and pushed them as more serious figures rather than putting them in that entertainment comedic role that a lot of black wrestlers get put in.
Exactly. And to piggyback off that, for those of you who may have forgotten, Bobby Lashley, Sheldon Benjamin, MVP, they, I think during the COVID years, this was around the time I really wasn't watching wrestling, so I had to go back and do some research. But they came up with a staple called the Hurt Syndicate. Or no, they were the Hurt Business at the time. And it was kind of getting over. Vince was kind of supporting it, but then by the time Triple H took over, he was getting into some backstage politics and issues with MVP and Bobby Lashley, and eventually they left and went to AEW, and they changed their names to the Hurt Syndicate, and they are, Dwayne, they are completely over. I mean, whenever they come out, the fans are just, we heard people, we heard. So that's another example of Triple H just, I don't know, just give it up on black talent, not really wanting to work with black talent. There was a great talent that was in NXT. I think they were called the Rascals. I think they may have came out of TNA. But Wes Lee, a brilliant young talented guy who didn't even get a chance at the main roster. They just cut him. So now he's with AEW. And another example is Jade Cargill, who Jade, looking at her from just the aesthetics, she is a superwoman, a black superhero. And WWE just did a poor job with booking her. They put the title on her, but it was kind of by default, right? Because it was so many people were hurt. And then obviously Triple H's favorite, they had Rhea Ripley come over to SmackDown and beat her. I think Tiffany, a girl that's like half her size, Tiffany Stratton, beat her before that, and then Rhea Ripley come over there and beat her twice. So she's been, and now Dwayne, she's down to the mid card wrestling for a mid card title. So Jade is being booked poorly. And then we got to get to the biggest of them all, our Nigerian brother, Oba Femi. So Oba Femi, he has been killing it. He was killing it down at NXT, came up to the main roster, doing great. And me and Dwayne was having this conversation like, all right, I mean, Dwayne said this first. He was like, WWE's gonna book themselves in a corner. So to the audience, there's levels to this, right? Like if you want to build up a star, kind of like if y'all remember Bill Goldberg and WCW, Bill Goldberg started out beating a bunch of just mid-card guys nobody really cared about, and then he worked his way up.
Not even mid-card. He was beating lower card guys when he's on the card. Nobody. he worked his way up to the mid-card.
So WWE, because me and Dwayne know WWE, whether y'all agree with us or not, they like to control how they build their wrestlers. They don't want they actually punish people for getting over organically. Oba Femi was so over when he hit the main roster that they had to do something with him. I mean, me and Dwayne was explaining like this man is getting attitude era pops. I mean, pops that come out when Roman Reigns comes out, when CM Punk comes out, when Seth Rollins comes out, and so they had to do something with him. But what they made the mistake, they immediately put Oba Femi in a feud with Brock Lesnar, a living legend. He defeats Brock Lesnar at WrestleMania, which it looked like it was going to be Brock Lesnar's retirement match. And Dwayne, what happened after he defeated Brock Lesnar at WrestleMania? They had nowhere to go because it was too soon to for him to start challenging Roman Reigns, because Roman Reigns also just became champion by defeating CM Punk at WrestleMania. So Roman has to hold the belt for a while, right? You can't just play hot potato with the belt. So Dwayne said they put themselves in a pickle, because the first thing they did, Dwayne, when he beat Brock Lesnar, they put him in a bunch of open challenge matches with a bunch of nobodies, completely killing his aura. But instead of them acknowledging that they booked themselves in the corner the way, they had to bring Brock Lesnar back to attack him so they could continue the feud. So let's hear your take on this.
I would say it made no sense, because like with Goldberg, and Goldberg is the most dramatic example because of the way his run was built. But typically in pro wrestling, when you're building up a star, you do it gradually. So what WCW didn't do with Goldberg is they didn't have Goldberg beating guys at the top of the card and then bring him down to beat up the mid-carders again. That made no sense. So already knew that was a problem. Like we were talking about, they booked themselves in a corner because they didn't want Oba beating the guys at the top yet. But all they have left for him to do is to beat up the mid card guys. But you just had him beat Brock Lesnar, so it looks like he's taking a step down rather than elevating himself and taking a step up. But then the other issue is, if you wanted to do a part two with Brock Lesnar, why would you make the first match basically a squash match where it was one sided, it wasn't really very competitive, and then you had Brock Lesnar retire? And to me, that would have been the perfect way to send off Brock Lesnar, because if you're Brock Lesnar and you're being beaten like that, because when was the last time you ever remember Brock Lesnar being beaten that convincingly in a match? I don't think we've ever. The closest thing I could think of is when Goldberg beat him the second time, but Goldberg caught him off
Yeah.
guard. So he
Yep.
didn't really beat Brock Lesnar in that way. He just caught him off guard. But we've never seen Brock Lesnar get beaten like that. So I'm thinking that's a good place to end his career, when he's being beaten in the ring in a way that we've never seen him being beaten before. So to bring him back, it's almost a situation where, well, we already saw him lose, and what the story is indicating to us is this is Brock Lesnar, who clearly now is past his prime. So if you bring him back and he loses again, it doesn't help Oba, because we've already established at this point he's just beating up an old Brock Lesnar who's not who he used to be. I mean, you saw with the first match with the F5, Oba just got up out of the F5 like it's not. We've never seen, to my knowledge, I've never seen anybody get up out of an F5 like that. So the story that they're telling is that Brock Lesnar clearly at this point is past his prime. He's not as dominant and powerful as used to be. So for the company to do a rematch, it doesn't make sense for Oba to be past his prime Brock Lesnar a second time. I mean, you're not really getting anything out of it. But then also to have Brock Lesnar win, which is what they did, now it hurts Oba because we've established Brock Lesnar is past his prime, and you just got beat by a past his prime Brock Lesnar that you beat at WrestleMania. So from a story standpoint, it made no sense. And also my problem from a story standpoint, it's, if you were going to do a fake retirement for Brock Lesnar, at least give a reason for why Brock Lesnar decided to change his mind and to come back, because that was a very emotional moment. It looked like Brock Lesnar really was questioning whether or not it was time to hang it up and to retire. So he just came out of nowhere, attacked Oba, and then they had the rematch, and there was no build up or story behind it. So that's the part that also made no sense to me from a booking perspective. That if you were going to do a rematch where Brock Lesnar decides he's not going to retire, at least do one promo where Brock Lesnar explains why he's not retiring. Have him explain why he was so emotional at WrestleMania night, because he never officially came out and said that he was going to retire. So maybe he wasn't thinking about retiring. Maybe he was just emotional because he realized he's past his prime and he's questioning whether or not he still has it. And then you could build a story around Brock Lesnar wants to rematch because he wants to prove to himself that he still has it. But they didn't build any storyline around the rematch. We just had the rematch. Oba lost, and that was it. So I just I don't understand why the booking has gotten as bad as it has in pro wrestling. Obviously, was not like this. When we were really invested in the product during the Monday Night Wars. I don't know what it is with pro wrestling and why the booking has gotten that bad, because the stuff I'm saying, I think that's fairly straightforward wrestling booking. That's typically how you would book a rematch or any type of feud. You'd have a storyline, a build up, something to get fans actually invested in the story and in the characters. I think with WWE stuff just happens, and then there's no reason for why it's happening. There's no reason to be invested in it. It just happens.
Absolutely, the way it gets worse. So I don't know if you picked up on this, but Oba Femi just recently won the King of the Ring tournament, maybe like a couple of weeks ago. And naturally, when you win the King of the Ring, you get a automatic title shot of a champion of your choosing at SummerSlam. So Oba comes out after the Monday night after he wins the King of the Ring, and he's getting into his spiel about who he wants to challenge, whether it's going to be Roman Reigns or I guess now it would be Sami Zayn, because Sami Zayn defeated Cody Rhodes. And Brock interrupts him and challenges him, or he beats him up first. Brock interrupts him. They get into an exchange. Brock beats him up. Obafemi goes to the backstage and tells Adam Pearce, who's the on-screen general manager, that I want Brock Lesnar in a match. I'm not worried about my championship match. I want Brock Lesnar. So they set up a Hell in a Cell between Brock Lesnar and Obafemi, which is probably going to be the trilogy with Oba going over. But it's like well, why did you have him win the King of the Ring? Like, who just foregoes a championship to have to
Exactly,
fight
but
somebody?
but that's what I mean about the storytelling. So if you wanted to conclude that feud in a trilogy match after Oba wins the King of the Ring, put the belt on Brock Lesnar.
Exactly.
So that's what I mean. But the booking doesn't make any sense. And also, what doesn't make sense to me, it's why is Brock Lesnar attacking Oba now? Initially, when they were building up the rivalry, Oba got over on Brock Lesnar every single time.
Every single time, every segment.
So I'm like, well, if you wanted a competitive trilogy, why would you initially sell the build up to the match as Oba just completely dominating Brock Lesnar and then dominated him at WrestleMania? So just there's no consistency in the storytelling. The psychology makes no sense in terms of the type of stories that they're doing. But and like we're talking about, I think they really wrote themselves into a hole where they pushed Oba, I think, further along than they really wanted him to be at this point.
Yep.
Because it's obvious they don't want him to be champion yet or even contending for the championship belt. But they've already built him up to where that's the position he should be in the company. And it doesn't help that he's extremely over with the fans
Extremely, extremely.
because
The
they
way
could put the belt on him right now and the fans would be behind it.
and the way when you talked about this, he's got people of all colors, races, creeds doing the overstrut.
Yeah.
I mean, he is so it's a beautiful thing to watch because like me and Dwayne, we grew up watching wrestling, and we always talk about the golden era peak because it's like we once you give us a taste of what pro wrestling should be like, this is what we expect. So it's like seeing the Stone Cold era pops, The Rock, Undertaker, seeing that and then seeing what wrestling is now, it's that nostalgia that we have with Oba, who is just organically over.
And that's really hard to do because the business wasn't as exposed during that time period as it is
Hmm.
now. So it's very difficult as a wrestler to build an organic connection with the fans when the company keeps telling you all of this is fake. Don't believe any of what you're seeing in the ring because when we were watching pro wrestling, most people knew this isn't real. It is scripted to a certain degree. There's certain things that are happening here that aren't real. But the companies weren't deliberately telling us, "Hey, this is all fake." And the thing we all joke about is how seriously would we have taken the Stone Cold and Vince McMahon feud if after every Monday night they went backstage and were taking pictures with each other and putting the pictures up on social media, talking about how great it was to work together. So that was a time period where the product still sold itself as being a serious product, where feuds still felt serious because they're being sold as being serious. Now everything is completely exposed. Now nothing's taken seriously to the point where it doesn't even make sense that you'd have wrestlers have these really vicious feuds and then go backstage and hug and take pictures and talk about how great it was to work with each other and how great it was to put the other wrestler over. So it's very hard in an environment like that to establish that type of an organic connection with fans. So the fact that Oba is able to do something like that, to me, I think it speaks volumes for the type of talent and abilities that he has. Because, yeah, like I said, I think a lot of fans watching might take it for granted now, but it's not easy being over like that in the current environment that we have in professional wrestling.
Absolutely. And to Dwayne's point, he's alluding to, and I encourage all WWE fans to boycott WWE Unreal that's on Netflix. It is destroying. It is absolutely destroying. It's one thing to lift the curtain up a little bit, but with current stars lifting up the curtain like they are, like it's just like Dwayne said, like one quick example. I always tell him how I stopped taking the Naomi and Bianca Belair feud seriously last year, or maybe the year before that, or maybe last year, when every time they have this fiery feud and I'm into it, they go on social media and vacationing, talking, laughing, hugging. So it's like, how can I see this on a Tuesday? And then when y'all get ready to go on screen on Friday, I'm supposed to take y'all get at each other's throats seriously.
Because
And
back in the day, heels and baby faces never even used to travel together because they didn't want to be seen in public together. And
exactly.
now they're actually taking pictures and showing the public that they're hanging out. And
Yeah.
like I said, we always knew it's not obviously not 100% real, but
Mhm.
there was still that presentation that you should take this seriously, and there was still some sense of respecting the fans enough to take it seriously and to have the fans invest in it and invest in something that they knew they could take seriously. But I feel like because of the internet age, obviously the internet would make it much more difficult to sustain certain secrets and privacy in the company. I think they've completely given up kayfabe to where they've exposed everything, and I don't think they realize that even if the fans are aware that this is not real, we still want to be able to suspend our disbelief enough to invest in it seriously. And I would joke with you about how when people go to watch a movie, we know the movie is not real. These people are acting and playing characters, but the movie isn't telling us that they're acting and playing characters. So that's the problem with WWE. The WWE keeps telling us these people are acting and they're playing characters.
Exactly, Brother Wayne. And, and I joke with you about this. My cousin was like, "Look, soap operas have been around for 50 years and they keep kayfabe. Like, you don't see Victor Newman running around with Jack Abbott, who he's been feuding with for 50 years." So it's like, what we do like about Oba is, to your point, I don't see Oba engaging in all the social media stuff like, hey, this guy's really my friend, even though we're beating each other up in the ring. So we do appreciate that from Oba, because at the end of the day, like, WWE, like, wrestlers and that whole genre of entertainment, that's not a job. That's really a lifestyle. If you want the product to be portrayed in a certain way, like, it's a lifestyle you have to live. Like, you have to at least, like Dwayne said, reward the fans enough to stop giving up so much of what's going on behind the scenes, right? So, and to piggyback off of the Oba thing when we was talking about race, I think WWE, like, I think the last world heavyweight champion black they had was Bobby Lashley, and that was like maybe 4 or 5 years ago. And right now, to Dwayne's point, Oba Femi, and we also got to give some love to Trick Williams on SmackDown, who's doing a tremendous job. I mean, he is United States champion right now, but he is definitely also over with the crowd. And if you put the bet on him, a world championship on him right now, they will not have an issue. But the question is, with the racial history of Triple H and how he deals with black talent, will Oba Femi, Dwayne, and Trick Williams ever get a chance to be world champions in WWE?
Yeah, I don't know because there's two things working against them. Obviously, the racial issue, but WWE, it's like they're deliberately trying not to build stars.
Mhm.
And that's the thing that baffles me with Obafemi, that you have this guy who has built an organic connection with the fans that's very rare to see in professional wrestling nowadays. I would like to think they would do as much as they can with that, and they haven't been. They've been putting him in very strangely booked feud with Brock Lesnar. It just makes no sense the more you think about it. But yeah, just like I said, I don't understand why the booking is as bad as it is, because you would think with Triple H running things, that as somebody who was not only a former wrestler but a former wrestler during the last golden age period of professional wrestling, should at least know about the basics of booking and putting together storylines and selling professional wrestling, like if it's a real competition. Because
Exactly.
because he did it. I mean, when you were watching Triple H in his prime, when he was the game, he really was selling himself like the game. There wasn't anything fake about what he was doing, and I'm sure you remember that moment from the first season of Tough Enough, where he
Yeah.
was confronting, the contestants. He was 100% in character, to where that wasn't fake. He was really
Mhm.
speaking to the passion that he felt as a professional wrestler. So it's strange that that guy who, even on Tough Enough, was still Triple H, still the game, still in that character, has is now overseeing a company that I feel like has completely lost the spirit of what professional wrestling is supposed to be.
Completely lost the spirit. I mean, Dwayne joke all the time. If AEW ever gets serious about being like a mainstream company, they I'm not saying they can completely overtake WWE, because WWE has such an international reach, but they could definitely mix the pot here in America. Like,
They've got their problems as
but they got their
well.
problems too. But I was telling the way, like, I've never seen WWE this bad. I mean, to me, in my opinion, and I've told the way that I've stopped watching the product pretty much at this, maybe the midway point, maybe like 3 months ago.
You gotta be back
I
into it.
Yeah, yeah, I had completely given up on SmackDown because that product was absolutely horrible. And Raw, with Oscar being gone, the Oba Femi stuff. I was in it at first, and then when right to the way when Brock just randomly attacked him from behind, I kind of checked out after that. So WWE, they're gonna always have these hardcore fans, but their prices are astronomical. The
No, that,
product isn't that, the
that's not
product
part
isn't
of it
that
too.
great.
But that's a part of it too, that you're charging the fans all this money, and you're telling the fans that none of this is serious, anyways.
None of it's serious. None of it.
So why then should the fans invest all that time and money in a product that they're being told is fake, it's not serious, that these people are just pretending to be characters, that there's no semblance of reality. They're not even trying to sell it like it's supposed to be real, that it was supposed to take it seriously. So that's the part that baffles me as well, that during a period of time where they've completely exposed pro wrestling in a way where they're basically telling the fans don't take this seriously, they're still expecting the fans to invest more time and more money than the fans have ever been asked to invest in the product before.
Exactly. Exactly.
How much were they charging for that bus tour with?
Oh, it was like $11,000 to sit on a bus with Cody Rhodes. And let's context them. We've got to put context. It's in Las Vegas, and Las Vegas, who those of you have been, is literally just a strip, and it's heavily populated with traffic all over the place. So you're gonna be sitting in traffic with Cody Rhodes for $11,000. So I know we covered a lot of ground today. Um, for our audience. We talked about, the Sol Ruca's racial background, the historical struggles of WWE dealing with black athletes, and also like the current state of WWE, and then the questionable booking. As me and Dwayne always joked around, like if they just imagine if WWE poured into Carmelo Hayes, if they poured into Jade Cargill, if they poured into Oba Femi and Trick Williams. These are just naturally gifted athletes who have a fan base, and you will bring more of black fandom into the product. Because I can assure you, as I'm presently looking at this, what do black fans have to look toward to? I mean, you got the hope of Oba Femi being booked properly. You got the hope of Trick Williams being booked properly. I think Jay's booking is completely gone. I think I'd be surprised if she renews her contract the way she's been booked this last year and a half. Bianca Belair, she's pregnant now. Naomi just had a baby, so who knows when she's gonna be ready to come back. So yeah, the state of wrestling for black athletes, it seems to be no different than what it was 20, 30 years
I
ago.
think the biggest difference is obviously there's less overt racial stereotypes. So
Yes.
so in that way, the black wrestlers now are presented more seriously than they were then. But other than that, we see the same reluctance to actually push black talent as we
Yes.
saw before.
Thanks for the correction, Dwayne, because you're
No,
right. Like the
no,
overt.
no African savages or voodoo witch doctors on the roster.
Now we joked about this. Hey, shout out to Oba Femi. I told the way I was gonna make sure I wear the Oba Femi necklace, but I hope Oba Femi knows if he's a historian of wrestling that he's one of the few, if the first, right, Dwayne? Because we know how they treated the first quote unquote African character. So for him to be booked seriously and the way he is, you're right. Thanks for the correction. We
You
definitely came a long way
you
in that
just made
sense.
me realize they've had some really weird booking with like actual continental African wrestlers, because Kamala wasn't actually from the continent. He was African American brother,
Yeah.
and Kofi Kingston actually is Ghanaian, and they were booking
Yes,
him
he's
like
gonna.
he's Jamaican. So they get it right this time. Oba actually is continental African, and he gets to be a continental African.
Yes, for those who don't know, Obafemi is straight out of Nigeria. Okay, he is legit Nigerian. He's not no cosplaying Black American. He is straight from the motherland. So, um, we thank y'all for listening to us. Dwayne, you got any other closing statements you want to make on the bill today?
I think the closing statement I would make is just to reiterate the topic at the beginning, that when we're engaging in any type of discourse around racial identity or anything involving race and racism in America, it's important to understand the historical background because there is a particular reason why certain things are structured the way that they are, and the reason why certain things are categorized the way that they are. So I think, I hope, in addition to wrestling knowledge, that the thing that the viewers take away from this discussion is to really understand and appreciate the history behind why America even has the one drop rule, and to recognize that the one drop rule is very uniquely American. Other countries have different ways that they use to categorize race, and all those different approaches to categorizing race ultimately are done to sustain the system of white supremacy, to sustain the system of colonialism. So I think when we understand that, I think then it enables us to have more productive conversations around things like the one drop rule and around racial identity.
That's a beautiful way to put a bow on it, brother. And before we go, audience, please follow my brother Dwayne on X, aka Twitter. The Omawale
Yes.
is the
Yeah.
handle.
Yes.
You can follow me at Spirit of Sankofa. You can also follow my brother Dwayne on Facebook, Dwayne Omawale, Pan African writer. Follow us there. Then my brother's also selling books that you can find him, Dwayne Omawale, or Restoring the African Mind Research on Amazon. So with that said, peace and love out to everybody, and get ready to see more content soon.